Back to Ourselves, Chapter 2. Capitalism and Governance. Governments and Politics. Throughout history, humans have managed themselves socially through monarchies. Whether the rulers were called kings, emperors, or lords, the reigns of a single leader demanded rulers to accumulate money, land, and power. It's not clear if the process of achieving the throne made kings rich, or if the riches allowed the ruler to gain this position, as he could hire mercenaries and buy land. Probably, in some cases, it was the first, and in some cases, the other. Those rulers have one thing in common. Monarchs were required to seize power and money to increase their ability to maintain their power. For centuries, the position of the ruler in a society gave them access to resources by means of taxes from their subjects, profit from conquests, and natural resources from the land in the kingdom. Make no mistakes, all monarch falls into this category, even if the ruler was considered good and kind to his subjects. The idea of an elected House of Commons or Parliament is old and can be traced back to ancient Greeks, the Roman Empire, and England in the 13th century. Nevertheless, the social ruling structure of this period was very different from the democracy we know in modern times. In ancient times, democratic rights and the opportunity to be elected have been given to a very small population group. Such a democratic structure was limited by a ruler's capacity to veto many laws and was almost always bound to a certain monarchy controlling the state of affairs, holding the ultimate power in executing the democratic decisions. This natural evolution of such a structure makes a lot of sense, as it is easier to control a population when they have some feeling of control on it. The creation of an institution made of the people themselves helped maintain the local leadership and, many times, served as a mediator between the monarchy and its subjects. In all those democracies, the group that was allowed to participate was small, made only of men, usually white, with a higher economic status. In other words, the democracies of the old days weren't close to being a form of social management in which the entire population had an equal opportunity to participate in and influence the system. Moreover, in almost all cases, the parliament had no absolute power on the monarchy. The democracies known to us today are new relative to our species' existence. The creation of a population led by a democratic structure without any superior monarch began at the end of the 18th century with the independence of the United States. That was less than 300 years ago, which isn't a long time compared to human evolution. Following the creation of the USA, the rest of the Western countries followed, overthrowing monarchs or making them irrelevant, establishing a new kind of democracy in which the people held power over the state. In the early period of the new democracies, a bigger part of the population could participate in the democratic process than the old democracies. Nevertheless, at that stage, women, slaves, and low-income citizens still didn't hold any rights. The creation of the new democratic countries started based on principles known from ancient times, which was the only option available at that point. When studying the evolution of democracy, we can see that every time one of the democratic states changes or upgrades its system, most of its democratic neighbors adopt the changes almost immediately. Until recently, the capacity of a certain state to maintain its democratic structure for more than 50 years has been small to non-existent. Regardless of many people's beliefs, the concept of democracy as we know it is extremely new and revolutionary. The democratic states known to us in Europe have existed for less than 100 years in Western Europe and less than 50 years in Eastern Europe. Indeed, American independence brought new ideas to the European nations, which then started doubting the need for their monarchs. The movement of Europeans towards democracy was slow and painful. In this process, the liberation from monarchies was followed by the leadership of local dictators and single rulers, which took advantage of the space created and the incapability of the populace to be free and equal. To make this point more practical, we can look at a few European countries and their last single ruler. Napoleon III ruled over France until the end of 1870. Wilhelm Gim ruled over Germany until the end of 1888. Wilhelm II ruled until 1918, and Adolf Hitler ruled until 1945. Benito Mussolini ruled over Italy until 1943. Joseph Stalin was the leader of the USSR until 1953. Francisco Franco ruled over Spain until 1975. The Ottoman Empire controlled the majority of Eastern Europe until 1918. Quite a few East European countries were liberated only in 1992. The creation of a democratic government is revolutionary, not only because it allows the populace to choose their leaders and change them as needed, but also because the fundamental ideas and purposes of the ruling party are entirely different. The main philosophy of emperors and monarchies was to maintain power and enrich the elite to support their rule. In a democratic system, the actions of a government are guided by principles based on the well-being, prosperity, and enrichment of its population as a whole. The process of changing the governing system in such a drastic manner required an evolutionary process of trial and error. The study of European history in the last 200 years shows us many parallel trials in different countries. The replacement of the monarchy by a nationalist ruler, the liberation from the ideals of nationalism, followed by the fall of the ruler, and the replacement of nationalism by democratic values of freedom and equality, are all different variations of the same process. Democratic governments are administrative and bureaucratic systems. Their actions should be clear and transparent to their citizens. The government's role is to promote the happiness and peacefulness of its citizens while encouraging intellectual and social growth. Governments are created for the sake of the prosperity of society. Any government that has acted differently in the past has been classified as tyrannical and has been destroyed by natural political movements. After all, regardless of the governing structure, it is the citizens' consent or inaction that gives governments their power. It would be absurd to believe otherwise. If true, it would be logical to assume that individuals who live under a government that is not fulfilling its duties will at a certain point rise against their oppressor. Moreover, the purpose of a democracy is to encourage and create free time and prosperity for its citizens. Nevertheless, it seems the current state of Western nation is not fulfilling its potential, as the elite governing group growing rich on the back of its citizens is the common reality of most societies, organizations, and structures known to us in the Western world. When approaching the subject of politics and government, it's essential to make a distinction between the two. Understanding the differences between them and their application isn't well understood by many. The lack of clarity in this subject is one of the main reasons for the miserable state achieved by Western democracies. Let's take the time to understand why. From the moment a population grows to a certain size, creating a manager or supervisor role is recommended for that population's efficiency and success. The bigger the population, the less the management job will be connected to the actual job of its working teams. As seen in many organizations, management is a profession by itself. This profession is evaluated based on the capacity of the management to choose the right people for each task, articulate clear objectives, and monitor the process. Management is necessary in any big organization as many fields need to be covered and employees must cooperate. To make it simple, due to the cooperation needed and the number of communal areas, creating a role that's in charge of operations and the common good leads to improved functionality for employees, the system, and its workers. The government's job isn't very different from a big company or an airport. It needs to manage and handle many practical jobs, bureaucratic jobs, marketing jobs, and so on. The more a population grows, the bigger the need for the managing party to maintain efficiency. This is true and relevant to profit as to non-profit organization. As long as a certain degree of efficiency and a certain population level exist, creating a managing party is both healthy and required. Following this logic, it can be said that under a democratic government job is a managerial, bureaucratic, and administrative. Politics, on the other hand, is a completely different subject. The definition of politics on Wikipedia is as follows. Politics, from Greek politika, definition, affairs of the cities, is the process of making decisions applying to all members of each group. More narrowly, it refers to achieving and exercising positions of governance, organized control over a human community, particularly a state. Furthermore, politics is the study or practice of the distribution of power and resources within a given community, as well as the interrelationship between communities. Various methods are deployed in politics, including promoting or forcing one's own political views among people, negotiating with other political subjects, making laws, and exercising force, including warfare against adversaries. Politics are exercised on a wide range of social levels, from clans and tribes of traditional societies through modern local governments, companies, and institutions up to sovereign states to the international level. It is very often said that politics is about power. A political system is a framework which defines acceptable political methods within a given society. Based on this definition, politics is mainly related to philosophy and sociology, oftentimes using force and trickery for self-interest. As the field of politics is primarily philosophical and social, at its core it is a game of power and control. Concepts as right or wrong are normally calculated backward, based on the achievement of a defined end goal, making politics a tool and not an organization. On many levels, politics cannot lead governments. It is a tool used and not a system. The dangerous aspect of politics is that without a clear vision and a practical backup, this field quickly devolves into trickery, bribery, manipulation, and crime. An unfortunate reality too common in the world, creating a system in which governments and politics are inseparable. By itself, it is enough to explain why many Western populations lost interest or trust in their governments. Without a doubt, politics is an important tool, but not a necessity to maintain either a country, state, or company. The use of violence by the government against its own citizens is wrong, and in many cases, a twisted way for a government to use its power. It's true to say that in the modern world, it can look like violence is the only way governments keep society in order. Alas, government violence should be a last resort solution, not a daily philosophy to maintain power. The creation of jailhouses, police fortresses, and armed forces made for the sake of protecting the citizens from themselves rather than an outside threat is a manipulated exploitation of the power given to the governing body. In truth, the government builds those systems to keep itself safe from the population. After a few decades of such violent management, the majority of the world sees the concept of government as distant, violent, and hostile. A simple parameter can immediately detect the overuse of politics. If the state's economy rises and technology improves, life, including income and free time, should improve for the masses. If that's true, but the masses do not see the benefits of income and free time, then the real beneficiaries of the new reality are the elite manipulating the population with the tools of politics. In such a case, it's safe to say that politics is occupying the government and not the opposite. A system in which an individual doesn't have the resources to enjoy their free time promotes a fear to losing what individuals don't have. Such a reality creates a deep feeling of loneliness, which creates the mental ignorance needed for a tyrannical government to hold control without the threat of individuals fighting back. As a conclusion, it's important to understand that the governing parties of our democratic societies should be in power for the sake of benefiting the well-being and prosperity of their citizens. The need for an administrative managing party is necessary as the population and countries grow. On the other side, the use of violence, manipulation, and the pursuit of self-interest contradict the fundamental ideas of a democracy, as they are all tools used by tyrants and monarchs. Politics, as a primary way of operating a democratic government, is a paradoxical reality, as the use of violence against the society, the use of power for serving self-interests, and the impoverishment of the population contradict the government purpose from the first place. In many people's minds, government is politics. As we will see in later chapters, all those thoughts are habits that manage to stay in our societies after millennia of monarchy and tyranny. If done correctly, creating a democratic government is a positive evolution that empowers the people, as it creates a decentralized, well-monitored organization. On the other side, calling a government a democracy just because it's not a monarchy is a misconception of vocabulary that doesn't benefit society as it should. Governments abusing the tools of violence, politics, and fear serve self-interest at best and reflect the ideas behind democracy. Separating those tools from our ruling parties is one of the most important steps toward a reality where the government will start benefiting its citizens. The creation of such a government is new, as is the idea of democracy. Looking at European history, creating a real democratic system is new, dating back less than 200 years. In most European countries, the liberation from a monarch and tyrant was only completed in the 20th century. Conversely, as we are working on evolving new societies based on new ideals, it's important to understand what to keep from our old ruling systems and what to abandon. But how can we manage to separate the positive and negative aspects of our ruling system? Let's dive deeper into the subject. The creation of a government charged with managing and leading its citizens has existed for as long as humans have formed societies. It is safe to assume that the existence of government has been created out of the population's needs and has maintained its role of supporting society regardless of time or location. It's also noticeable that specific types of people have engaged in governing roles over time. Such a tendency is natural and healthy, as different people have different strengths and occupations. Some individuals are better than their peers at making tough decisions, and some people have more passion for leadership than others. The idea that specific kinds of people are made for politics is as trivial as the idea that specific kinds of people should be doctors. It's neither good nor bad, just a reflection of how things are. As understood by many writers and leaders throughout history, any organization requires a group of individuals equipped with the knowledge and capacity to lead. There have long been conversations about the need for professional people in the right positions. The idea that some of us are better at governing doesn't contradict any democratic ideas, but promotes a healthy society monitored by many. Many people, working in their own store, may not be qualified to or have the tools to understand the intricacies of economics, healthcare, and defense, but they can understand which policies will have positive or negative effects on their life. Admitting that our individual capacities are limited and understanding what we cannot do is fundamental for a healthy system. Knowing that specific people should concentrate on their strengths and let other professionals handle their own fields is ideal for a healthy society. It's utopian thinking that all citizens are constantly equal in status and always equal in their participation in society. This thinking contradicts the need for government and society. As we agree that we should let professionals make decisions in their own fields, it would be absurd to task unequipped masses to make both day-to-day and complex choices for society and government. From the other side, the decision-makers cannot go unchecked. For a governmental system to work for the benefit of its population, the professionalism of the decision-making must be checked and evaluated by the masses, not the decision-maker himself. Decision-making is a responsibility that individuals take on. One of the natural outcomes of making decisions is sometimes making the wrong one. On a national scale, the outcome of a good decision may be negative from the point of view of an unprofessional person who doesn't understand the cause and effect of the decision. Without a doubt, good decisions can have bad outcomes. Regardless, that doesn't mean that based on the information in hand, the process applied for taking the decision was wrong. As decision-making is a matter of calculating and understanding the stream of events and potential consequences, the unprofessional masses cannot judge a decision. As true as it is, the incapability of the masses to judge the decision-making process doesn't imply that they can't understand its consequences. Due to this gap, a democracy in which the population is constantly involved in the politics of their own government is problematic. As a system built on the evaluation of decisions of the governing group and not the professionalism of its work will be open to manipulation of the masses by powerful groups of self-interest. It's fascinating to observe that most of the citizens of any city in history prefer passing their time doing what they like and are good at. Recent research in cognitive psychology supports this and found that the energy required from an individual when involved in matters behind the spectrum of a person occupation, such as politics and economy, requires enormous amounts of time and energy that could be better spent elsewhere. An extended period of such a behavior will create an overwork of the system that prevents specialization in a specific field. Such energy loss complicates the individual's life and is unnecessary for maintaining their happiness. This idea had been part of common logic in the past, but it seems to have been lost in our generation. The new philosophical approach of the individual in Western society, which not only believes in the need for constantly having an opinion, one that is in line with their peers' perception, is one of the causes of such a cognitive overload. This is anti-democratic and contradictory to the concept of pluralism, which is fundamental to maintaining a free and healthy population. If correct, a general shift is needed, allowing the general population to evaluate its governing system by simple matrices agreed upon in advance. The need for the right people in government who will constantly be valued for their practical achievement, and the need for a population of individuals able to recognize themselves and understand the system they are living in is important for the sake of the future of the democratic and political system we are living in. It's also important for individuals to feel they have control and understand the consequences of their actions to maintain a healthy government. The current political reality in the West is full of paradoxes. One of the biggest ones is related to the technological progress we're all so proud of. The Western world strives to invent machines to do tasks instead of us, with the purpose of increasing leisure and productivity. On many levels, we have the capacity to achieve a better reality through technology, but as long as it is used to concentrate power in the hand of the elite, we'll continue to live far away from such a reality. Moreover, the banks, which have supposedly been created to support the market and keep the population's money safe, control the government and create both private and national debt. Debts hunt us on a daily basis. The consequences of operating a government controlled by politics affect both the organization itself and its citizens. As a government is an administrative and management organization, there needs to be a clear philosophy that describes and maintains its role. As concluded above, the government's main purpose is to promote its citizens' well-being and the country's prosperity. The foundation of the government must be kept in this order. In most cases, the two will support each other as the country is made up of its citizens. Such a philosophy is clear and easy to evaluate. Maintaining such a clear philosophy gives its citizens an understandable parameter to judge and evaluate its government. Using politics in a system without a clear philosophy is dangerous, as the system is weak and can be easily affected by manipulation. As politics is the capacity to exercise positions of governance and achieve organized control over a human community, the best politician may not be the best person to operate a government. In many cases, people who possess a talent for politics do not possess the necessary skills to operate a large organization. Good politicians often require good social skills or the ability to manipulate situations. On the other side, the head of a big organization requires different qualities, such as the ability to operate under pressure, meet goals, and delegate decision-making. In many cases, the qualities of a good manager are contradictory or parallel to the qualities of a politician. Unfortunately, the way things are done today, a politician is more likely to win the election than a good, skilled person. The control of politics on governments promises that the personal philosophy of the leader of the hour will drastically affect the decision-making and evolution of the entire government and its citizens. An extended period of ruling by a self-interested government will inevitably change the social structure and the values of the individuals in the country. This point is important as it makes it easier to understand how a non-profit organization like a government manages to get involved in profit and surplus. The belief we require good politicians in power comes from the ancient way we governed ourselves. In times of kings and empires, the capacity to hold the ruling position required a skillful politician. After all, it was a period of individual rulers threatened by their closest people. In many cases, the leader's survival ability was based on his capacity to react simultaneously, aggressively, and wisely. History is full of good examples that can help us understand why, evolutionarily speaking, leaders of the past had to be good politicians. The creation of a democratic social system has led to a new reality in which we can separate politics from government. Leaders don't need to manipulate populations to maintain power if said power is maintained by a general standard. The requirements demanded of a governor don't require the use of politics to get or maintain that position. By creating a healthy, democratic governing system that prescribes clear goals and is evaluated by its ability to achieve them, leaders won't need reality and deceive their voters. A simple, straightforward structure can be built, one in which the population should vote separately for each ministry post. The candidates have to show practical experience in the field and should promote a clear plan of action if elected. If done correctly, such a will have no need for politics, which will drastically diminish the budget needed for elections. The professional structure will promise effective execution that can be monitored over time by the standard outlined by the chosen candidate. In such a system, no politics are required in an election if the model is based on the professionality of the candidate and not their capacity to engage in politics. Unfortunately, in Western societies, political skill is required and used to get elected rather than improve the people's state. The elite and the self-interested opportunists manage modern politics. As the separation between the need for politics and government wasn't clear at the creation of our modern system, the elite's ability to manipulate the government by politics brought nations to operate based on the need of self-interested groups and not the common good of the people. Making such a change in our governing system can seem complicated, but is necessary if we are to save democracy in the West. Any change requires effort, and any effort is worth spending if the desired results are achieved. Humanity is standing at a crossroads. The way we govern ourselves affects every aspect of our lives and surroundings. Ideological principles should guide us, not momentary opinion. Based on the numerous organizations fighting to make a better world in 2017, the number of professionals available to manage our countries and world exists. We just need to unite them and allow them to work. The separation of politics from government is crucial. Operating our government without such a separation will maintain the principles of the old monarchies and tyrannies. Capitalism. Capitalism is an economic mechanism in which capital is deployed in the purpose of generating profit. Like any other mechanism, it can be used in a positive and constructive manner or a negative and depressive manner. When applying these terms in relation to capitalism, the positive or negative effect refer not to the individual that deploy his capital, but to society, its structure, and its general implications. Capitalism has been one of the major forces promoting the creation of democracies, innovation, and prosperity. At its core, it is a mechanism that aims for maximization of productivity and encourage currency circulation. When applied correctly, capitalism increases market size, employment, and competition, leading to diversity and flexible employment. To better understand the poor state of the West in the 21st century, separating positive and negative capitalism is fundamental. It will help us to separate the healthy part of this mechanism from the negative aspects that evolved over time, endangering the survival of the mechanism as a whole. Positive capitalism can be defined as a system in which capital held by the wealthy part of the population is deployed into the market, supporting innovative and hard-working people to venture, develop, and execute their ideas. The outcome of such a system allows the wealthy to increase their wealth by creating opportunities to the capable individuals in society. By allocating their capital, innovation, employment, and trade increase, allowing the creation of a middle class, supporting the democratic system. This mechanism has been used for centuries all over the world. The Venice Republic, prospering for centuries, is a fantastic example of such a mechanism. In this period, exploration was funded by the wealthy part of the population, allowing adventurers to have the necessary funding for their journey. Current-day venture capital works on the same principle, allowing innovative individuals to have the necessary budget from private wealthy individuals to develop their companies. It is a win-win mechanism that benefits all its participants and society as a whole. Negative capitalism can be defined as a system in which capital held by the wealthy part of the population is deployed into the market, achieving profit by exploiting local population and manipulating local regulation for the sole purpose of self-interest. In this system, the deployment of capital is based on the opportunities and vulnerabilities discovered or created in the market, with the aim of diminishing competition, creating a concentration of power, and achieving control over the population. This kind of capitalism is zero-sum game, in which the profit of the capitalist emerges from the impoverishment of other participants. It requires force, exploitation, and promote inequality over time. Such a practice has been reported wildly in the early days of the Industrial Revolution in the UK. It has been the mechanism described in Karl Marx writing, and the kid of capitalism most of the current Westerns refer to when opposing it. Throughout this chapter, we will delve into the fundamental of negative capitalism, its mechanism, and its consequences. I truly believe that positive capitalism is the best and possibly the only economical system promoting peace and prosperity. The force that protected the democratic nations in the last 200 years, used as a positive force against supporting the middle class in West. Regardless, as we will show in this chapter, it seems negative. Capitalism is the main system taking over the West, putting in danger the Western Empire and all its values. When referring to the capitalist in this book, we will refer to the wealthy individuals that practice and promote negative capitalism. Only by understanding the difference between the two, promoting the first and fighting the later, that we have a chance to overcome the evil forces currently controlling the West and its greatness. The marketplace. Capitalism is all about the creation of profit. Before addressing the implication of negative capitalism on society, we will start by addressing the ways the mechanism works. For the creation of profit, a surplus is required in a working place. The idea of a surplus can be defined as the creation of extra money above the necessary cost of production. This means creating extra income in the process of creating the product itself. A few options to achieve this purpose. Reducing the cost of the manufacturing or importation of products. This surplus can be created by reducing the price of materials required for production or by reducing expenses related to local commerce and importation laws. Reducing the cost of employment while keeping the product price as it was. This method requires reducing labor costs without reflecting the final product price change. Increasing the price of the product while keeping the same manufacturing costs. This method is done by convincing a population to pay a higher price for products. These techniques for creating surplus require an operating market. If no market exists, none of the above options are even possible. In many cases, the process of creating a surplus requires a certain devaluation. How is this done? To understand, we'll first examine how a marketplace works. The basic assumption of a healthy marketplace is that the total amount of money in the market reflects and represents the value of the commodities, products, in the market. To simplify, calculate the total number of products and their prices to know how much money exists in a market. By giving products a fixed value based on the employee's working time and the cost of the natural resources required for production, the amount of money in a market can be clear and stable. In such a system, a balance will be created as long as there's a constant circulation of money between the working people going to the market as buyers and sellers. Such a balance gives everyone enough money for their basic needs. Let's take the time to understand this idea better. To understand how a market works, it's essential to understand the concept of submarket and their connections. An industry is built from many processes operating simultaneously and independently from each other. These processes can be called submarkets. For example, in the bread industry, many submarkets exist, like the wheat market, the milk market, the egg market, the employment market, and many more. Each submarket functions with and thanks to other submarkets, which create the industry itself when combined. A submarket like the milk market can be operated as a submarket of many industries. The individual milk farm is not considered a submarket, but is actively creating the submarket itself. In general, in a marketplace, multitudes of final products are offered to potential buyers. Those products are all submarkets of the bigger marketplace. In such a market, a seller in a submarket will be the buyer in another one. For example, a shoe store employee is part of the employment submarket by trading their time for income. Going to the market for groceries makes our shoe seller a buyer in the grocery submarket. It's simple to understand. An employee sells their time to the employer, and the employee goes to the marketplace later to buy groceries with the money they made from their employment. In a small, limited market, equilibrium will be maintained as long as the money constantly circulates between the submarkets. An individual owning a business that employs other people to create a better product will keep the market in balance as long as the owner takes a salary equivalent to the value of their work as an employee. In such a marketplace, a person who wants more income can work more or professionalize in a specific field, as long as they're spending their income immediately for the sake of allowing a smooth flow of money circulation, a balance will be kept. As the market is a living organism evolving based on its movement, the basic rule of a healthy economy demands a constant movement of money. When one person in the market decides they want to accumulate some savings, a blockage of funds will be created due to a lack of circulation in the market. Such a blockage will inevitably bring to an immediate reaction observed as a shortage of money for the rest of the market itself. Let's look at a simple example. A market of 10 people and 30 gold coins valued at 1. The requirement for a good standard of living for each individual is 3 coins each. Each person manufactures a different product and sells it to the extra 9 people in the market. As long as people are constantly exchanging coins between themselves, they always have 3 coins, which will be reflected in products or coins. From the moment one of the participants decides that he would like to own 5 coins and starts accumulating them, there will be a shortage of 2 coins in the market circulation. In a marketplace in which resources are limited, the concentration of resources by one person or group will immediately create a shortage for the others. This point is easy to understand, but missed somehow when looking at our lives today. The size of the market isn't relevant to this principle. As long as the resources are limited, the rule will apply. To keep it simple, we will keep those market principles in mind. Any market can be seen as the primary market of some submarket, or be seen as a submarket of a bigger one. The principle of a balanced market will always be valid regardless of its size. The creation of profit. Creating profit that doesn't already exist requires a change in the market. Smaller markets have the advantage of operating as a community, which protects them from individual fraud. The bigger the market, the harder it will be for individuals to effect the changes needed to create profit. Let's see how it works. When the pursuit of profit arises in a market, 2 options exist to achieve such a goal. The first is to reduce the cost required to create the product. In this case, the manufacturing cost will diminish while the market price will stay unchanged. The second option is to increase the price of the commodities without increasing the manufacturing cost. Negative capitalistic requires two fundamental tools for the creation of profit: an employment market and/or market isolation. Let us understand, how does it work? If an individual works for themselves manufacturing chairs, this individual will use only the time required to manufacture, the cost of their working hours, and the cost of the natural resources required for the job. No profit will be created by the individual work. On the other hand, thanks to their income, they'll still be able to live well. A fisherman who fishes by himself and makes a good living can make some good money, which is not considered a profit. We can calculate the fisherman's hourly wage by calculating the price of the fish sold relative to the fuel, boat, and nets. It's an important point to understand before we continue. Some occupations are valued more than others. This is reflected in their income per hour. The ability to generate a good income per hour doesn't make it a profit. It's straightforward. The cost of products must reflect the cost of natural resources required to build the product and compensate for the time worked and the effort put into the process. In this case, an inevitable professionalization is considered a natural resource. An expert heart surgeon doesn't make a profit by performing surgery. Instead, he is generating an income. The cost of the operation should be valued by the cost of the material and space required, combined with his unique capacities acquired by time and effort spent previously on the operation. Let's look at the chairmaker again. Under the assumption that he works in a place he owns, the cost of the chairs for the chairmaker will stem from the material needed for the manufacturing process. This will include the wood bought, nails, and machinery costs. The final sale price in general will be fixed by the market and the buyer. For his part, the chairmaker will try to sell it as expensive as possible to reflect the cost of his working hours. If we assume that no transportation costs are required to bring the chairs to the market, the final selling price minus the manufacturing cost will determine the hourly income of the chairmaker. If the product quality is high, the chairmaker can earn more per hour, which still won't make it a profit. This distinction is essential, as it differs between a hard-working man who earns well for his job and a capitalist making a profit on his investment. Based on all the information above, we can conclude that to allow the creation of profit, there must be an additional gap created we didn't cover yet. How is this done? It all comes down to the devaluation of employment and the separation of people and their natural resources. Understanding the concept of employment is crucial. Employment is a relationship between two parties, usually based on a contract where work is paid for. One party may be a corporation, for-profit, not-for-profit organization, cooperative, or other entity, the employer, and the other party is the employee. Employees work in return for payment, which may be in the form of an hourly wage, by piecework, or an annual salary, depending on the type of work an employee does or which sector they work in. Employees may receive bonus payments or stock options in some fields. In some types of employment, employees receive benefits in addition to payment. To simplify it, employment is an agreement between an individual and their employer in which a certain amount of payment is agreed upon in exchange for the time and capacity of the employee. One of the ways to create profit is to pay for the employment a fixed hourly price, unrelated to the number of products or value created. Eventually, the creation of profit is the creation of extra income from sales above the total cost of employment and manufacturing. The important conclusion is that to create profit for the employer, the employee will be obliged to work extra manufacturing hours to generate extra value, called surplus, for the employer. The creation of profit by the employer when he do not take part in the process of creation of value is the way negative capitalism operates. The way it is achieved is, in many cases, done by diminishing another person's income in the manufacturing process or reducing manufacturing costs. I'm referring to manufacturing here as it's simple to understand. In real life, miners, transportation people, salespeople, builders, and so on are all employees that can be manipulated for the sake of the employer profit. Profit creation is very limited in a small communal market. Buyers can compare the price and quality of similar products in the market and can compare employment wages, which limits the possibility of creating profit. So, how does it work, and how can capitalism manage to create profit? Let's take back the two options of profit unrelated to the employment cost above and apply them to our market. By making product prices higher, the immediate outcome is predicated as a massive drop in sales. Let's use bananas as an example. In markets where several people are selling the same bananas, an increase in the price of a commodity doesn't make sense in the eyes of the buyer, who can go and buy the same commodity next door at a lower price. We can apply this to any product, even iPhones. If 3 stores sell the same iPhone and one store sells it at a higher price, people will buy from the business with the lowest price. The second option available for the creation of profit is lowering the cost of natural resources. Let's go back to our bananas. The options are to bring lower quality bananas and keep the high price, or to try to find a cheaper way to bring the bananas to the store, which will normally take more time, and bring older bananas. Under the same assumption made above, if the quality of a product drops but the price stays high, following a short period of trial and self-realization, the consumers will go to the neighboring store and buy from there. This time gap is exploit in many scams, allowing the vendor to sell low-quality products and disappear before the market realizes the discrepancy. The last option available is to lower the cost of employment needed for manufacturing. A devaluation of the employment price is indeed very effective and probably the best option to create profit. Capitalists have two tools available for this devaluation: blurring the individual's understanding of the worth of their time or blurring their ability to evaluate manufacturing costs. The success of these tools will be reflected in lowering the employee's hourly wage, which will inevitably force the employee to work more hours for the same price. To make it simple, if a shop owner who sells bananas manages to pay his employees less for an hour of work, they can keep good quality bananas at competitive prices, which generates profit and is still accepted by market consumers. To create such a change in the market, a very important process must happen: separating the employee from their natural resources, preventing them to understand their worth. Without the ability of an individual to work by themselves with the natural resources around them, that individual will be forced to enter the employment cycle for income. In such a market, the employee's capacity to bargain wages will be disproportionate to the employer's power. The creation of a society in which the individual is obliged to sell their time to maintain their lifestyle will become the modus apparatus. As the individual lacks the capacity to maintain a lifestyle without the obligation to sell their time, a perfect system will be created to exploit the employee and create profit. In a society ruled by an elite that deploy a negative capitalistic scheme, an educational system will be created to form the young generation, indoctrinating them to believe that their best option for success is to enter the employment cycle. In such a society, no effort will be required for the creation of profit, as the separation of the people and their natural resources and the willingness of the young to enter the employment cycle will become the obvious reality. A practical example is the next one. A college and university education is required in the USA to get a good job with a sufficient income. At the same time, a lot of money is required to get a good education. In many cases, a loan will be required for the studies. At the end of those studies, the young, educated person will be obliged to enter the employment cycle first, to pay back his debts, and secondly, to maintain himself. This is just one simple example of the vicious capitalistic system. The outcome of establishing the profit structure in a balanced market. Profit creation under negative capitalism principles is impossible in a balanced and free market without creating a chain of events that affects the entire market. As we concluded above, there's no space for such profit in a balanced market. Profit creation and its accumulation will immediately create a shortage in the system. All submarkets are related in the market as they support each other. The crash of a submarket will inevitably create a shortage in the rest of the submarkets. As a rule, creating profit in a balanced market will diminish the pluralism of businesses and create a concentration of power by the profit maker. Let's understand why. When there's a profit in a balanced market, it creates an income shortage in one of its submarkets. This shortage will prevent from the seller in a submarket from having the income needed to buy from another submarket. A lack of buyers in submarkets will push the seller to find alternative income sources. This impoverishment cycle can also work in a market that already has employees. Let's take a real-life example. If a bartender's salary drops, they won't be able to buy their normal groceries in the supermarket, which will also create an income loss in the supermarket section. In case the seller has his own employees and the sales are dropping, he'll have two options available: lower the quality of his product or the wages of his employees. In many cases, the supermarket owner will have to employ fewer people, which will affect their income, and they won't spend as much money at the bar, which creates another shortage for the bartender, who then buys less in the supermarket. This cycle can be called the cycle of impoverishment. If the seller in such a cycle don't have employees, he'll have no choice but to become an employee for someone else, as he can't maintain his own business. From the moment the profit and accumulation of capital mechanism starts, the market's evolution becomes quite clear. In this cycle, the employment of others gives small business owners the chance to lower their employees' salaries before closing their stores and joining the employment pool. As we saw, the entire market and its submarkets are connected. The creation of the rat race after profit in one submarket will inevitably bring a change to all the market. This kicks off a long process of employee impoverishment, closure of small businesses, and decreased product variety and quality. Such a process can be called the impoverishment cycle of the capitalism. During this process, two groups will be created: the employees and the employers. Such a separation is necessary for creating and maintaining profit, as the market is changing and feeding the capitalist scheme. Only two kinds of people can exist to efficiently maintain the capitalist scheme of profit creation. The division is clear: the ones making a profit on the time of others and those selling their time. Grouping employees and employers makes everything much easier. The employee working in a profit-based economy will work for the profit of his employer while receiving an income that he'll spend at another business for the sake of the profit of the employer of the other shop. Operating a society this way for an extended period will create a natural cycle in which the employer will inevitably accumulate more profit, while the employees will work more, earn less, and will be at the hands and mercy of the employer as a way of life. Now we can better understand the chain of event created by the pursuit of profit in negative capitalism. In a limited market, the creation of profit and its accumulation by one organization or individual will create a shortage in the market. More profit will be made by the individual, and fewer funds will be available for the rest of the market. This shortage will create falling sales in the submarkets. The submarket will be unable to support employment and will start affecting the store employees. Less money will be circulating, and small shop owners will have less income. This lack of income will force small businesses to close and join the employment pool. A cycle of impoverishment and shortage will arise, known as an economic crisis, creating a clear separation between employer and employees. A clear separation between the employer and employees classes will be created and sustained by its own existence. In the 21st century, the devaluation of the monetary system and the enlargement of local markets to global ones have created the perfect foundation for creating the capitalist scheme. The consequences of a capitalistic global market. A limited market can create a limited profit. A communal market exists to protect all players, as the pursuit of profit by exploitation is antisocial and contradictory to the common good. For the survival and evolution of negative capitalism, the market must continue to grow. This enlargement of markets has shaped global trade and the process of globalization. Human empires have always tried to take over and rule the world's populations. In many cases, the ruling empire believed it had conquered the entire world. The idea of bringing all humans under one ruler of a single entity can be called globalization. This concept is as old as humanity, and it's what the empires have kept in mind during many conquests. Looking at it from that perspective, it's safe to say that the concept of globalization and its evolution is a natural process pursued by humanity all over history. The fascinating thing empires and world domination is that, after reaching new land and taking over their resources, a point is reached in which maintaining control and dominance is no longer economically profitable. The fact that empires continue to control vast territories regardless of their cost can prove that the wish for world dominance overpower the economical incentives of conquer. It is an important point, as it clearly shows the line that exists between money and dominance. Position the first after the second. For most of Western people in the 21st century, the idea that the conquest of ancient empires was unrelated to profit can be surprising and hard to grasp. There's no doubt that at the first, the riches acquired by reaching new lands played a big role, but if the purpose of the conquerors was only profit, the cost of expansion and risks involved in war wouldn't be worth the actual riches obtained from a certain point. Looking back on history, we see that the majority of empires were made after the unification of the world as they knew it. Those empires always believed that the unification of all their subjects would be possible if the populace adopted the philosophy of the empire. Not all historians agree on this perspective, but there's evidence of this in all empires unrelated to their location and time. The course of the general unification of humans has progressed slowly over thousands of years. Every empire that has risen and fallen has left some common concepts and culture that integrated into the local societies throughout its conquered land. The empire of modern times exists thanks to positive capitalism. Thanks to the rise of the Western world and its technology, we're now closer than ever to globalization. The rise of negative capitalism and its dominance in the market are pushing us away from true globalization that will benefit the majority of humans. We need to realize that the tools that brought us towards global unification are no longer the dominant tool ruling the market. There is no doubt the negative capitalism allowed Western life to flourish and stabilize a high standard of living. Regardless, the price we are all paying for it today do not worth the marginal extras it gives us. Furthermore, we reached a point in which we can look back and understand that it is due to the exploitation of third world nations that the West reached its comfort. A realization that can maybe convince some of us to truly address the current state of these nations. The idea that a practical tool for a specific problem becomes the problem after it's been used for many generations is not surprising. Many books have been written about this idea in the Buddhist and Eastern cultures. Global unification was pursued in the past based on the willingness of an elite group to control and enrich itself. Those ideas don't benefit any people outside of that minority, as they're not based on principles like the well-being of the globe or its inhabitants, but on the greed of individuals at the cost of hurting people and the planet. The conversations and information spread around in recent years about global warming are just a part of the problems created by the current control of the elite in the Western Empire. The illogical arguments regarding the validity of the information verifying global warming are ridiculous. The argument between politicians regarding the existence of global warming is nothing but a brutal way to hide the facts behind the ruin of the globe for profit. Even if we decide to ignore the subject of global warming, many other problems have been created following the pursuit of profit and concentration of power by the elite, which can be proven and shown easily. The pollution in cities, the pollution of water and nature by our factories, and the extinction of various species around us, the impoverishment of the majority of the population, and the military-industrial complex are just some of the consequences of blind pursuit of global profit. The globalization of commerce in recent years allows a new network of trade that can benefit the world. Throughout history, the limitations in trade, language, and geographic location created a limitation of resources for local populations. Those limitations could bring a leader to decide to go to war to increase resources. The lack of logistical structure to move merchandise limited the capacity of goods and products to reach far destinations. Thanks to positive capitalism led by the Western Empire, the ability to produce products, ship them safely and efficiently, and preserve the products in the process created a new era in which the idea of limited resources in a specific market became a matter of decision and not a matter of incapability. It's true that the cost of these resources, in many cases, is not affordable for a local market. But as we will see, the problem is not the process or the availability, but a lack of willingness of the elite to reduce its profit for the benefit of the rest of the people. The global network achieved in the 21st century is efficient, healthy, and productive for the entire population. The main complication we are currently facing is how we use our new network. As we mentioned previously, pursuing profit in a limited market has clear boundaries. If the pursuit of profit is made aggressively in a limited market, the enrichment system will create a progressive concentration of power, which will eventually bring to market collapse. The new globalization trading channels have removed all boundaries from the natural resource limitation in local markets. The ability to import and export resources and products is just one aspect of the benefits created by globalization. As a first step, the capacity to export allows manufacturers to produce in larger quantities, and importation allows manufacturers to buy natural resources from cheaper suppliers. In the market of natural resources, very similar to the marketplace next to your house, buying bigger quantities normally reduces the cost of a single unit. The capacity for a local manufacturer to import cheaper machines and natural resources allows manufacturers to produce larger quantities and sell to more customers globally. While by itself, this development can promote prosperity by reducing the final cost of product and increase variations in a marketplace, it is also a new platform for exploitation is taken over by negative capitalism. Let us understand why it is so. The capacity to import and export has brought many benefits to the Western world. A large quantity of new products being sold in local markets was the first step of the globalized market. As more products arrived and various new stores were created, more jobs and more consumption volume were created. In the second step, the capacity of companies to manufacture enormous quantities with cheap employment from the other side of the world has reduced the price of manufacturing to an uncompetitive price for local manufacturers. Having the ability to sell the same product cheaper in a market is one of the ways to create profit. By itself, it shouldn't be seen as a negative change, as it allows the local population to save money. It's true to say that as long as the cheaper product is imported by local businesses and the import is equally possible to all business owners, the ability to sell the same quality of product at a cheaper price benefits the entire population. This is all constructive and positive as long as the import of goods do not overtake local production and the import is made by local business and industries. On the other hand, if the manufacturer enters new markets by themselves or the import is limited to a specific group, the local stores won't be able to compete. Such an entry of an international player into the local market will inevitably bring to the closure of most small and medium businesses as they will progressively lose their previous advantage. In recent years, the entry of international brands into local markets created an immediate chain reaction that resulted in the closure of local small and medium businesses. This went hand in hand with a fall in the price of commodities below a reasonably competitive price and the appearance of low-quality products. This effect is valid in all the markets and submarkets. Examples are H&M, Primark, all foreign supermarket brands, department stores like MediaMarkt, and fast food like McDonald's, KFC, and many more. As we've seen earlier in this chapter, this process of impoverishment of the local community and reduction of the number of stores are exactly the changes needed to achieve control over local population by local elite. It's important to understand that from the moment global expansion is available to big corporations, the mathematical scheme of negative capitalism doesn't require a person or country to survive and is easily spread and implemented in any country as long as the local government is weak or fragile. Allowing the importation of cheap natural resources or the relocation of the manufacturing line itself to other countries inevitably creates direct unemployment across the local, creating a chain of event affecting all local submarkets. Markets are an aggregate of its submarkets, and the closure of one local submarket will inevitably bring the closure of other related submarkets. From the moment natural resources that exist in the market are imported, the income of the local independent industry will collapse. This is easy to trace in industries like agriculture and clothing. The relocation of part or all of the manufacturing line to another market directly causes unemployment to rise. A high level of unemployment creates the foundation for big corporations to enter local markets. The entry of multinational corporations into any market brings cheap, varied products manufactured elsewhere. This directly affects the income of local merchants, who eventually close their businesses due to reduced income. The closure of those small and medium businesses is one of the biggest reasons for a drastic shift in unemployment numbers, as the shop owner and their employees are entering the cycle of unemployment. Unemployment and the arrival of multinational corporations decrease employee wages, as mainly unprofessional manpower is needed, and profit must be maintained. It is important to mention that the newly unemployed population that arose from this process is normally the middle-class population, which is the core of the power of democracy in their local governments. This phenomenon can be observed in cities around the world. The closure of small businesses following the market entry of corporations creates a very important socio-political effect. The heart of a democratic nation is with its middle class. As the rich have the power and means to enslave the poor, there must be a strong middle class to sustain the democratic foundation of the nation. Democracy is based on the majority's decision for the benefit of its population as a whole. Without a strong middle class to maintain democracy, the foundation of the institution trembles and gives the self-interested elite more power. The closure of small businesses and private stores not only breaks the equilibrium of a local market, but simultaneously promotes the destruction of the middle class and the healthy political democratic foundation of the government. Imports and exports, good tools in the wrong hands. The general idea of globalization is positive if used outside of the negative capitalist scheme. There's a fundamental point about imports and exports to understand, which is one of the foundations for healthy globalization. To maintain a free global trade of resources, we must understand the geographic division of humanity and its relation to optimization. Such a system is necessary to prevent waste or profit for the wrong organization. A trade of limited goods distributed based on the constant movement of the consumer will inevitably create unnecessary gaps between the producer and the consumer, concentrating the producer's power and generating waste. As any kind of movement requires resources, a system in which the products and the consumer are constantly moving will undoubtedly generate waste. As humans are the only species generating waste that's not consumed by different entities later on, it can be easily agreed that the fundamental idea of creating waste is unnatural and negative to both humans and nature. Moreover, it's important to mention that if a country doesn't possess natural resources or the needed number of employees for production, importing resources is the best option for the general population. Such importation is based on the needs of the local population. Exportation of products is healthy as long as it's used as a tool for a market that doesn't have the capacity to manufacture the commodities or doesn't have the natural resources needed. To promise a balanced market, which includes international trading, the cost of importing should always be in balance with the income from exporting of a country, called balance of trade. Overproduction to reduce product costs isn't a good reason to export if it's only done in the purpose of creating profit for a few people or the elite. A wonderful example for it can be found in many African countries currently. While some countries export natural resources in high volumes, the profit generated from the export is concentrated in the hand of the elite, preventing the local population to thrive. To maintain positive commerce in an import-export system, overproduction must be based on demand made by request from another market that cannot create the commodity in the first place, and never the opposite. Let's take the time to understand why a market should require imports. One reason is based on technological development in another market. Those technological developments should improve the standard of living and the well-being of society. In such a case, the capacity of a company or country to create a better product will benefit the entire population. The second reason relates to a local market's lack of natural resources. For example, let's look at importing fruits, vegetables, petrol, etc., to markets that lack the necessary climate or resources. In this case, imports should be done based on a standard of quality that promises relatively good products to the population. In both cases, importation should be done as little as possible and should concentrate on the quality of the commodity, not its low price. It's important to understand that manufacturing is an extremely well-calculated field. Overproduction as a reason to export is a reality that doesn't happen by mistake and is enacted by self-interested elite and self-interest actors in pursuit of profit. One of the common explanations given today in support this kind of capitalism is that in a competitive world, exportation from one country strengthens the local economy. They explain that thanks to exports and imports, the government has the capacity to lower taxes. Unfortunately, such an argument is based on a self-concentrated, isolated way of looking at a world economy. As we saw previously, in a marketplace, the concentration of riches on one side of the world will inevitably create impoverishment in another place. A local market that becomes part of a global market under the capitalistic trade gives the elite and self-interest actors all the tools needed to dramatically increase their profit while killing the local market. The import of products provides them with the following opportunities. 1. Cheaper natural resources in other countries, even if produced in the local market. 2. Cheaper labor at the cost of unemployment in the local market. 3. The creation of multinational organizations allows the capitalist to be unaffected by local market failures and avoid local taxation. The development of such a process and its consequences is slow but certain. The longer the market is part of the capitalistic optimization system of profit, the more unstable the local market becomes, and the more the local market suffers from dependence on the global market. This process can be seen not only in the Western world, but can be seen in all countries that are part of this unhealthy structure of the current globalization network, ruled by the few. Tom Burgess wrote an enlightening book called The Looting Machine, which describes the disastrous consequences of the process of such a system in Africa. In his book, he describes the development of such a system following most of Africa independence. The misperception of the situations in Africa and Asia, and the reason for this situation in the Western world, is one of the clearest signs of the elite controlling and understanding of the population regarding the new global system. The spiral evolution of negative capitalism taking over the global market is simple and easy to measure in any economy and market. At first, a balanced local market maintains a healthy balance based on its natural resources and manpower. A push to open import-export trade to global multinational corporations occurs under the guise of progress and optimization. Entrance of multinational corporations to the market and the creation of bureaucratic automatic jobs for low wages and short contracts. Devaluation of local production following the lowest available prices from other markets. Incapability of small businesses to compete with the corporate prices, leading to their closures. Death of local industries that cannot compete with low import prices. Creation of massive unemployment, which boosts the income of the corporations as the only cheap commodities available are corporate products. Increase in unemployment and collapse of the middle class. Market optimization, in which most of the market is employed in a specific domain controlled by international corporations. Creation of a global net profit that is stronger than the local government and unaffected by local market economic fluctuations. By allowing such an evolution, developments will inevitably make the market to be dependent on the global market and the local riches. This reality will create an unstable local economy that no longer has the capacity to disconnect itself from the global market. This cycle is a wonderful example of how a minority of individuals can create good tools and use them badly. Looking at the world today, it's easy to see how the global market mainly benefits the corporations and their beneficiaries, but doesn't benefit the new global cities and their citizens. The conclusion I'm trying to get to is not that imports and exports should be avoided. As a matter of fact, it is part of the natural evolution of humans and essential for positive globalization. The point is that it is not a question of if, but of how and why a country imports and exports. It is essential to understand that importing and exporting are positive as long as a country's exports are equal to the imports. If a country exports more than it imports, it means another country must do the opposite. Balance is essential in all sizes of markets. An imbalance in the import-export scale will always promise imbalance in another place. As long as a governmental system exists to promise equal imports and exports, trade can be maintained as positive for the population in the long run, both locally and globally. An extreme imbalance of import is dangerous for the safety of the nation as a whole. A long period of over-import will create dependency of the market on another. In such a case, the national security and independence of the importing country is at risk. It will affect the employment structure of a market and affect the capacity of the nation to bargain in difficult moment. This idea is clear to the elite and has been part of a general scheme that forced third world country to reach near bankruptcy, demanding the IMF to come for the rescue. Unsurprisingly, the rescue packages offered from strong nations and the IMF come in the price of loss of sovereignty. It is true for third world countries as Argentina and Egypt, as it is true regarding Greece after its debt crisis in 2012. Negative capitalism and government. The entrance of the government to the cycle of national debts allows the rich elite to take over markets under the justification of globalization. The creation of a democratic government in a global market occupied by its subjects' prosperity and well-being is still in the middle of its natural evolutionary process. As such, it's important to constantly monitor this process with clear checks and balances. The lack of such standards allows self-interested individuals to take control and bring the population under the control of the few. Without a doubt, thousands of years of monarchy have rooted some fundamental parasites in societies that need to be found and eliminated. The Western world has arrived at a stage in which the old system of concentrated power doesn't fit the new social system we are working so hard to achieve. The fusion of government and economy is one of those parasites that we're holding onto from the previous ruling systems. As we mentioned previously, governments are a managing organization, meaning that it is none of its business to handle profit. The fundamental function of a government is to create, administer, and manage all the fields related to the common well-being of its subjects. Governments can enact and raise taxes to acquire the funds necessary to operate. Each sum that enters the government account should be invested in a clear and transparent manner for the sake of avoiding mismanagement. Simply put, government is or should be a non-profit organization. As such, it should not occupy itself with creating a surplus in its work or its citizens, as every sum taken by the government for the sake of surplus directly impacts the value of the income missing for the population. Moreover, the relationship between government and business should be a one-directional relationship. The role of the government is to monitor the activities of businesses and ensure there's no exploitation or concentration of power. It's true to say that government intervention in the market is based on its local philosophy, which varies from country to country. But we can all agree that the government's job should not be, in any case, involved in doing business or creating profit for itself. Unfortunately, due to corruption and the creation of interest-paying national debt, all Western countries' government are currently a profit mechanism, leading to a general deterioration of the system itself. How did we arrive here? How did nobody notice? Those are very good questions indeed. The creation of profit by a minority at the price of the impoverishment of others is antisocial. It's the government's responsibility to block and fight this process. Profit creation is limited as long as the price of the natural resources and the employment rate are controlled and dictated by the local market itself. A strong government concentrated on the good of its subjects will consciously or unconsciously prevent the development of negative capitalism from exploiting natural resources or devaluing wages. By creating legislation regarding the working hours and wages of employment in the market, while maintaining a strong policy on imports and exports in ways of tariffs for the sake of the majority of individuals. These actions will create a natural balance that will naturally protect itself. It's possible that the globalization evolved too fast compared to the local government's ability to understand or fight it. Or possibly, in some cases, the local government didn't understand the risk they took by accepting the new commerce philosophy. The fact is, today, we reached a point in which the international cooperation and the elite holds power over government, as the national debt and the self-interested rulers are suffocating the population and its future. The national debt and the interest rates attached to it forced governments to bow to these groups and execute policies that benefit them, creating a loop of misery to local markets. The existence of such national debts requires a non-profit organization to produce a surplus for the sake of its survival. In some absurd and twisted manner, a country is currently considered healthy if it manages to pay back its interest rate on the national loan. This implies a straightforward point. The government does not have the ability to pay back its debts or the original capital. It's a loop known to many individuals, in which the need to create income doesn't improve the situation, but doesn't make it worse either. With the unreasonable amount of debt taken by nations, it is quite easy to understand why governments don't manage to take themselves out of those debts. The government's job is complicated enough without needing to maintain a profitable business, and it's absurd to believe that it will manage to do both. Additionally, any amount of interest paid is taxpayer money that could be allocated to his own personal development or the improvement of society. Interest payment for government is everywhere and always an oppressive expense imposed on its citizens. The need for the government to create a surplus is destructive and abusive and a process that should be avoided. If negative capitalism merges with the government philosophy, tax collection is the only tool a government has to create a surplus. In today's economy, a big part of taxes taken from citizens is used to cover an interest rate on government debts. The taxes taken as high sales taxes and income taxes are a government tool that promotes imbalance and inequality in the market, as the seller's income diminishes hand in hand with the increase of consumer spending. The government's use of high-income tax and sales tax promises insufficient funds for the individual in their daily life. That is, without any doubt, increasing and accelerating the population's poverty process. As governments worldwide are fighting to collect enough funds to pay the interest rate on their debts, they'll never come close to covering the national debts in the first place. This struggle cannot bring any positive evolution to its citizens, as it promises increased taxes, which just creates more poverty. This situation is known and understood by professionals and governments. Nevertheless, no actions have been taken by the majority of the countries around the globe. Solutions exist. They're not easy ones, but they exist. I truly believe that understanding the role of a government, comprehending capitalist ideas, and knowing the danger of merging the two are the first steps toward finding better solutions. The New World Order. The optimization of the global market based on the vision of our current elite has a known end: the creation of an unprofessional employment market with limited access to knowledge and natural resources. In the last few decades, individuals have lost their understanding of professionalism and only know the basic functions necessary to operate machinery for a given task. In a society in which the primary function of humans is to operate a machine or supervise a network without the need to understand how or why it works, the unprofessional population will undoubtedly cooperate in exchange for employment. Such a weak population will eventually work for the price of any wage as long as it exists. The Western world has lost its capacity to maintain itself, as it has lost its industrial power and never had its own natural resources. For the sake of its survival, the constant import of cheap commodities for the illusion of comfort of the masses continues at the cost of enslavement of Asian and African populations. Western society, by itself, doesn't manufacture the majority of what they consume, which makes them dependent on African and Asian countries. Most of the work available in the Western world is bureaucratic, unproductive, and unnecessary to the actual survival and maintenance of a peaceful society, as most commodities purchased by Westerners are commodities that don't come from any administrative work. To make this point stronger, most employment in the West is bureaucratic. At the same time, the need for an actual production force is required for the products the population consumes in a market where most individuals cannot create products themselves. In such a society, the ones who control jobs and resources will control society. Looking forward. The conclusion taken from these ideas should not, in any case, be that globalization, imports and exports are unhealthy. As mentioned above, globalization can and should benefit the population. As seen in this chapter, a general motive repeats itself when approaching any field in our society. The tools acquired in the last decade have drastically increased our comfort, health, longevity, and understanding of ourselves and the world around us. The new communication and logistical tools are remarkable and can be used to benefit the entire human population. It's important to say that most of the progress in the last 200 years has been made thanks to research and our ability to use the new tools on large scales. Human evolution in the last 2 centuries has been possible only thanks to people and entities that willingly invested their capital in research and bold navigation across the globe. Many misconceptions exist about the origin of the funds invested in early research and global expeditions. In the early 17th century, no king or government had invested in research or long expeditions, which were risky and costly. Most of the funding came from investors looking for a way to increase their capital. It's true to say that this investment eventually created an elite class of business people and merchants that overpowered kings and kingdoms. But due to the healthy development of societies around that power, democracies and free market has emerged. As mentioned above, any concentration of power, especially economic, is unsocial and dangerous. Conversely, as long as the purpose of the investment is done for the sake of more investment, no blockage of capital is created, allowing the wheels of positive capitalism to flourish. There's nothing wrong with letting the people who know how to lead do their job. But it is a problem to allow any individual or entity to accumulate wealth that is not reinvent into the economy. Capitalism brought us to our modern world and should be appreciated for its contributions to humanity. Conversely, the idea of concentration of power and wealth, or the use of capitalism to create profit and enrich a select few, is dangerous and should be prevented. The fact that we became a global community doesn't mean that our resources are unlimited. In fact, at any given moment, resources are always limited in some way. The belief that we'll manage to find more or dig up more resources is theoretical at best and doesn't promise material results. As any market is always limited, it has the same rules as any limited system when it comes to balancing the system. We know that at any given time, enough resources already exist for the entire population on Earth to live well. The only possible explanation for the lack of resources in most of the world is the creation of imbalance and concentration of resources by the few. In fact, based on a New York Times report dated July 2017, there are 2,000 billionaires worldwide. The value of the 10 wealthiest persons in the world together is $670 billion US dollars. It's difficult to understand how much money that actually is. Based on publications made by www.visionafarth.org, a calculation has been made that shows that to end extreme poverty worldwide in 20 years, the total cost per year would be about $175 billion. This represents less than 1% of the combined income of the richest countries in the world. Moreover, the total funds required during those 20 years don't surpass the sum of profit from the 2,000 billionaires mentioned above. This is just a fast illustration of the rule of equilibrium existing in the current global market. Before going to the streets and asking for those 2,000 people's wallets, it's important to understand what we are angry about. A system made for the sake of prosperity requires a socially aware movement. As our population grows, so does the market. The need for new jobs and progress is part of our daily lives as we constantly grow and consume more. A system that fairly creates surplus, meaning that the surplus itself doesn't come from the impoverishment of the employees or the decrease in the quality of our products, can be positive and even required. The only limitation to such capital is that it must be reinvested into the system to create more decent jobs and benefit the population itself. As with any other system, capitalism as a philosophy for a global market can lead us all to a better future. The main problem with the system itself is the creation of profit for limited groups and individuals. The economic world we live in is more in our imagination than in the world around us. In reality, as with any other imaginary aspect, it survives because we accept it and maintain it with our actions. Companies and corporations are entities that don't really exist and don't pay for their mistakes, allowing individuals to rape the globe and its people for profit without taking any responsibility. Money and its value no longer exist in the actual world, but are just digital amounts we agree to follow. This social money illusion is used to maintain the impoverishment of the many while sustaining the power of the global elite. The creation of something from nothing is an illusion made by magicians and should not enter the world of trade. A society that lives based on a resource it doesn't have is a society that's either waiting for a miracle or is aware of the disaster awaiting future generations. To create a healthy monetary system that won't require endless resources to preserve itself, there needs to be a basic rule of existence. The rule is straightforward. Any person, entity, or group cannot use the resources he doesn't have in the real world. Such a rule promises control of the natural balance of things and will naturally prevent the abstract creation or concentration of power. Governments are the guardians of our societies and population. Creating profit for those institutions is contradictory to their mission. The necessity of governments to create a surplus and profit on the account of their citizens to repay debts and their interest rates is absurd. It creates an unproportionable burden on its citizens. The government should be bound to the same rules of existence as its individuals. Indeed, there are cases in which more resources will benefit the population in the short term, but the long-term consequences of such actions to future generations aren't worth the short-term benefits. Many will argue that without today's system of government loans, the world as we know it today wouldn't be possible. To be quite honest, the situation of the economy and its government in 2017 is unconstructive to its population. We can observe it in the unemployment rates, the economic crisis of the last 20 years, the high tax rates paid by citizens for the sake of paying the debts of previous generations, and the unnecessary risks taken by private banks and private investors. Business is a field of economics. Government is a field of management and philosophy. The government and the economy interact, as maintaining an economy is based partly on the investor's belief in the local government's power to maintain stability. Such a connection is one-directional and shouldn't cross to the other side, just as the courts of justice are parallel to government and economics but shouldn't cross each other. Such a structure is important and must be maintained. Governments should be concerned about benefiting their populations, just as the businessman's concern should be creating capital, and the courts should be concerned about justice. The idea of individual profit is dangerous and antisocial if applied based on wrong principles. Pursuing individualistic dreams for profit reflects the root of our social problems. The pursuit of profit and concentration of power by our elite and corporations created the system we know today. The concentration of power and the incapability of the masses to maintain themselves is a direct consequence of this greed. The shortage of funds in our government system is a direct effect of the loan system that shouldn't concern the populace, as it shouldn't be possible in the first place. Profit as a social order is a sickness that affects to any human who touches it. It does not need a single language, religion, or location, as it is understood intuitively. There's a difference between having a small personal surplus and being rich. As discussed above, the resources needed to maintain all humanity exist in nature. Some recent publications show that if we started spreading our resources based on human needs and not based on profit, the general cost of production would diminish drastically, and we would avoid the majority of the waste creation. In a healthy global market, a structure of employment is needed. People with more professional skills need to be paid more for their time. People should be able to accumulate small amounts of money. Import and export are healthy for local populations if done well, and the government raising taxes for specific projects is positive. Simply put, the capitalist structure isn't bad, but it's not perfect either. The wave of protests against capitalism comes from ignorance and fear. All protests made by the populace against capitalism are, in fact, protests against profits and concentration of power. This misconception is a tool the profit seekers use as they turn the anger and frustration of the masses against a neutral system and not the individuals benefiting it. The rush after profit is antisocial and unproductive to any nation and humanity in the long run. The ability of a person to enslave another for profit they don't need should be illegal and monitored by all authorities. Understanding the problem is the first step toward finding a good solution. We, as individuals, are creating a new world. This new global era is not a myth or idea, but a reality we're headed toward and living every day. It's our responsibility to create a better world for future generations. If we stop telling ourselves that we're too small and ignorant, we will start to understand that the future is in our hands. In the next chapter, we'll discuss the evolution of social movements, examine our options and possible processes for change. The actions taken are a consequence of our inner philosophy and how we see life. Decisions based on practical ideas that promote the well-being of the future generation are good ideas that need to be executed, even if they require bearing the consequences. Let's examine our options.